Hello, my name is Stefan Reynolds. I'm inviting you to the retreat on the 22nd to the 25th of June, where we'll be having a retreat on spirituality for a time of crisis. And we'll be looking at the situation in the world today and relating it to three writers, three mystics, who wrote at a time of crisis in the history of the world, and see how their wisdom can be relevant to what we are going through today. This situation we're living through today, health fears and the loss of old forms of communication, kind of meeting up, and the replacement with new forms of communication online, means we're living through a time of change and uncertainty. And we're having to live much more locally than we used to in our lockdown situation, but we're at the same time much more aware of the world, of the global situation. We're listening to world news much more than we used to. So we're living more locally, and there's an increased global awareness. So all these are changes in our lives, and trying to make sense of them, we might relate to similar situations that have been in the past, where comparable adaptation has been needed by the people. And so I've chosen for this retreat three writers, mystics, as retreat leaders, as Edith, Stein, Etty Hillesum, and Simone Weil. There were three writers during the Second World War. And the Second World War is obviously different from the present situation, but there are similarities. So they were in lockdown. You remember the diaries of Anne Frank, which was two of the people we'll be looking at were in a very similar place and to Anne Frank, and that's a serious lockdown. And we'll be looking at how they dealt with having to hide themselves away, lack of travel. They were unable to move during the Second World War, and they were in danger. So there was this fear of safety, fear similar to the fear of health that we have today. And there was the sense of the old era passing away, the old certainties of kind of assurance that we would be looking after each other seemed to be ending in a time of nationalism, where each country was concerned to protect its borders and to not allow any passing between the borders. So and those are similarities between the Second World War and what we're going through today. And the wisdom of these writers are what's going to be the content of the retreat. The retreat is a 4-day program, and it's you may be unfamiliar with online retreats, but the purpose is so we would have two talks each day. We'll have two times of meditation each day, and 2 times for sharing, group sharing, and questions and responses. So there's a sort of structure to the day, which doesn't mean it takes up your whole day. You'll still be able to get on with the things you have to do in your life. But these are times where we will have focused reflection on the situation that we're living through today and the best response to it. Etty Hillesum says, everywhere things are both very good and very bad at the same time. And this is the eternal wisdom is how to deal with the wonderful things and the terrible things of life, which is always the situation. It seems to be sometimes more accentuated, but Etty Hillesum, who was working in concentration camps, which you might say was the worst possible situation, also was able to find the very good. The very good was there. So the retreat is about finding the very good and in the very difficult situations that we may be in as well. So in this retreat, on the first day, we'll be looking at the present situation of the world today. And then we'll be looking at the essential response that these mystics and writers advise us to take towards the world, how to, what is the essential response that we need in order to relate to the world. And the question for small groups will be, how does the present situation we're going through show that we are all interconnected? I think this is something that the crisis of today has brought to our awareness. We're all interconnected, and that there is one world, and that we are all in this together. This is the essential, partly the essential response that these mystics have, tell us to become aware of. The second day, we'll be looking at the growth into freedom. But sometimes during lockdown, we have more time for ourselves than we did before. And now we come to the summer holidays. How do we use our time and they speak about growing to inner freedom. So even when outer freedoms seem to be limited, we can't travel as much as we used to, we can't meet up as much as we used to. It's an opportunity to find inner freedom. So I'll be looking at that in their writing. And then alongside that is our responsibility for others and for the world, in that this sense that we're all interconnected means that everything we do has an impact in the world. So the question maybe for the small groups in the second day will be, how do we let go of the thought, why me, when things go wrong? These writers had a very difficult time, and sometimes we are in an easy situation vis-a-vis COVID and the world situation, or sometimes very difficult, and then we kind of think, well, why me? Why is it difficult for me when others have it easy? So how do we let go of the thought that there's to taking it all just in terms of ourselves? How do we let go of being a victim to the circumstances that life presents? How do we grow in inner freedom and responsibility? The third day, we'll be looking at creativity. And these writers were all very beautiful writings they wrote, and they wrote autobiographies and diaries. And so it's a very personal reflection that they give about their situation. So we'll be looking at writing as a way of self-expression, and we'll have some time to look at journaling, the practice of journaling, and the difference between autobiography, where we're writing about things that have happened to us in the past, and we have this space of retrospective reflection on what's happened, and diary, where we're writing about what's happening to us now in the moment, and how these two ways of reflecting on ourselves can help give a perspective from on our whole being, past, present, and future. And then in the afternoon, we'll be looking at gender and race. Now, this is was very important for these writers. How did they define themselves? They were women, they were Jewish, and that had an impact on the way they could relate to the world in that era. They were limited in their what they were able to do in the academic world, which was their area, and also their race, their Jewish race, meant that they became a persecuted people. And this sense of what is our identity, our bodily identities in terms of gender or our background, how much should that be defining our lives, and how much should we be free from any sense that we are defined by gender or race? Now, these are questions which they raise, and they give some very important early reflections. So they will be counted among the early feminist writers, and yet at the same time they didn't deny the specificness of what it was to be a woman. So they talk about womanhood. So there's a specific identity, which they do see as linked to gender and race. They do, as Jewish people, see a specialness about their background or racial background. And the question for the small groups on that day is that how do we show solidarity with all those people in the world, especially those at the front line at the moment, that is health workers, decision makers, and the sick. How can we show solidarity with, even if we are in a safe situation ourselves, how can we contribute to those who are on the front line? All the writers I'm looking at in this retreat felt they really wanted to contribute to bringing peace back to Europe. So they were very aware of those who were on the front line. On the last day, the day 4, we will be looking more at their spiritual wisdom, which they give us. They were all mystics, and they were Christians, although they didn't belong. Edith Stein did belong to the church, but the other two never took baptism and weren't part of the church, but saw themselves as Christians. And they developed a mysticism which is very relevant to today. And that centers on 2 things. Well, the first we look at in the morning, finding the one thing that matters. It says in the confusion and the chaos that they were having to live through at that time, the upheaval and the restrictions they had, where they had no certainty of what was going to happen in the future, it was still possible to find the one thing that matters. So we'll be looking at that. And then in the afternoon, the last session, we'll be looking at their generosity, that we find the one thing that matters. And this helps us to give our lives for others. And all these writers were engaged in giving their lives for others, and in a sense that they all did give their lives. And not just for others, but for God. Most of them, they came to the realization that it wasn't so much God who was going to help us, but it's about us helping God. That there's a part of us which is our God-likeness, which we have to protect, and we have to, in the face of all the onslaughts of the world, we have this responsibility to protect God in others and in ourselves, protect that which is most precious and which can easily be lost in times of crisis. And the question for small groups on that last day is, how can we use our worries about our families and our loved ones and our own health in a positive way, so that we have a natural worry about those who are vulnerable in society, but worry by itself doesn't help anyone. So it's how we can transfer that worry into positive help for others in the way we relate. So that's the content of the retreat. And there'll be time during the retreat for group sessions to discuss these questions, time to meet me personally, personal sessions, and time for meditation, which will be part of the day. So signing up to the retreat is giving 4 days to going deeper into our meditation practice and finding a way which can give meaning to the present situation we're living through at this time. So I hope people can join.